Hello everyone, welcome. My name's Excoundrel, and today I'm doing a video that's quite long. It will be separated out into timestamps, and you guys can look through each of those individual timestamps as you like. This is my So You Want to Jungle guide. It's one of the most common requests that I get on the channel, like how do I jungle, what do I do, what do I think about? This guide will not cover everything. Jungling is an experience, and you get better at it the more that you play it. But I'm hoping this will give you more insight than you get from kind of like a very average tutorial on the jungle, and we're going to go through as much as we can to help teach you the processes in the jungle and get you up to speed and get you jungling better. So in this guide, we are going to cover jungle pathing. We're going to cover what to think about when ganking, gank pathing. We're going to analyze an early game and talk about the neutral objective setups, and we'll also talk about some junglers that I would recommend for new and intermediate players. Of course, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel, and if you like this content, feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. I'm also giving away skins in April. You've got about 3 days left or so to make sure that you like and comment on as many videos as you can throughout April to ensure that you're in with a chance of winning some skins. Brilliant. Love it. Let's get into the guide. Okay, first things first, the absolute basics of jungling, and it really comes down to spells. I get told that people don't know this, so I am going to put it in this video very briefly. If you're in the jungle, you need to take Smite. If you do not take Smite, you will not be able to jungle effectively. Smite allows you to deal a significant portion of true damage, and true damage is damage that ignores all resistances. So when you deal 440 damage, or when you deal 440 true damage, you are dealing 440 damage. It is not being reduced by anything. And by smiting a large minion or monster, you're going to be able to get HP back. And this smite can then be upgraded into either challenging smite or chilling smite, which are two variations of smite. We call them red smite and blue smite, which is why they're colored red and blue on this graphic. Usually you take chilling smite, but in general they are two smites that allow you to have a bit more utility in the game. You also get 20% bonus experience from jungle monsters. So this gives you more experience for clearing the jungle, and you deal 10% more damage to jungle monsters passively, and monsters that you do damage burn for 30 magic damage and restore 30 HP to you over 5 seconds. You also gain charges of smite throughout the game. Yes, as an absolute basic for the jungle, make sure you have smite. If you're going to jungle, you need to have this spell to be able to do so. So before we get into the sort of the real meat of jungle pathing, I kind of want to talk about what jungle pathing actually means. Jungle pathing is the decision-making process in which junglers decide when and where to gank, if they want to gank at all, how many camps they want to farm, and also potentially looking for opportunities to invade and counter jungle. If you don't know what these terminologies mean, I'll give you a very brief TLDR. Ganking is where you come from the jungle into a lane to try and kill or put pressure on an enemy laner. Farming is where you're just one by one going through and killing all of your jungle camps. And invading is where you take the opportunity to go into the enemy jungle and either take their enemy jungle camps or look to kill the enemy jungler. So that is a brief TLDR of those particular terminologies. But jungle pathing is the decision-making process that you have as a jungler when you are deciding which camps to take and why you're going to take them. And there are always several different factors at play when deciding how to clear, but there are some standard routes that can help you get to grips with the very basics of jungling that will allow you to then later adapt and be more fluid with your jungle pathing. Okay, so we're going to start with this map, right? I'm going to be using a little drawing tool to help you figure out. You're going to come from base. You're going to walk towards base, and you're going to make a decision between starting at your blue buff or starting at your red buff, okay? As I said before, mana-intensive junglers, like a Mumu, like Olaf, or anybody else that you find will generally be out of mana quickly when attempting to clear the jungle, will often want to start at their blue buff. But a general rule of thumb is that most junglers can very effectively start at their red buff. So you're coming into your jungle. Let's say you're going to start at your red buff. And I would say that if you're confused about whether to start at blue or red, it is usually always better to start at red buff. So let's say you're coming to your red buff. This is where you're going to start, okay? Depending on which side of the map, red or blue side, you'll either have your bot lane around or you'll have your Baron lane around to help you take the red buff. It is a good idea to ask for help, but it is not necessary for your jungle clear. So you're going to start at the red buff, okay? You're going to take this buff. You'll be attacking it, and you'll want to use your smite to keep yourself as healthy as possible when taking your first buff. Now you have options. You have to remember that the River Scuttler does not spawn until 85 seconds into the game. So the River Scuttler will not spawn for some time at the start of the game. The first path we're going to talk about is called buff to buff. This means starting at one of your two buffs, doing the camp, going over to your other buff, and then using that time to then do the River Scuttler that you've ended up on the side of the map. You can then sometimes grab an early ward in the enemy jungle, or at least just set up correctly. The reason buff to buff works relatively well in Wild Rift is because it gets you level 3. So it gets you level 3 by just doing 2 buffs. And the reason you want level 3 is it unlocks all of your abilities. So level 3 is usually a good power spike in the early game for most characters because you get access to each one of your abilities. And that often allows you to, duel effectively, fight enemy champions, whatever. Buff to buff is a super quick clear route that allows you to set up for the River Scuttler. Some junglers will find that they clear buff to buff too quickly and they end up with excess time. It depends on the jungler. So an adaptation of buff to buff, especially if you're just planning from going red to blue into the top scuttler, is to go red into wolves, into blue, into top scuttler. I will show you an example of both of these now. All right, so I'm using Lee Sin for this first example of a buff to buff jungle clear. The reason that I'm using Lee Sin is that he's a relatively good single target damage jungler, and it's one of the few junglers that can really do red buff to blue buff and actually be set up correctly on time. There are 2 skills that you can start with Lee Sin. Some people like to start with your shield, some people like to start with your Sonic Wave. I like Sonic Wave because it clears the camp a little quicker. But I'm just going to show you what a buff to buff looks like, and then we can talk a little bit about what you can do from this point on the map. All right, so we're starting a red buff. Hopefully we're getting a pull. If we don't get a pull, it's not a big problem. Getting some help from your team is always going to be nice. What you can do, and this just helps you save a little bit of time in the jungle, is you can kind of pull the buff over to the area that you want to walk from. This guy's not really playing ball, but you do a bit of damage over time. Okay, so now I'm walking over to my blue buff. Remember, I have about 30 seconds or so, a little bit longer, until the River Scuttler spawns. So we're now going to do our blue buff. I'm going to try and pull it over like this. Come on, blue buff. Over this way. Because I obviously want to get into the river as quickly as possible. Right. I'm going to smite it. So we're a little bit early, but what we're going to do with this time is we are going to go stick a ward right here, and you can even do this. You can walk up and hit the... and have a look at where the enemy jungler may have started. And then we are there on time for the spawn of the Scuttle. And we have the smite up as well, and we can get this and walk away. That then allows us to have options. What do we do from this position? Well, I'm going to get my handy little pen out. Okay, so what do we do from this position? I'm here on the map that sort of coincides with this area on the mini-map. We have options. We've got a ward in the enemy jungle, so we may be able to see where the enemy jungler is. If I see that they haven't taken this camp, this camp, this camp, I might want to go into the enemy jungle and potentially do something about that. That would all depend on the state of this lane and the state of this lane. A general rule of thumb is that you want the enemy to be as close to their tower as possible before making an invade. I could also look for a gank towards mid, or look for a gank towards top from this position, depending on where the enemy lane is. Like, for instance, Malphite, clearly a very easy gank right now. If there are no gank opportunities, we will just walk back into our blue side jungle and do some clearing. In this particular circumstance, I'm going to go kill the bot Malphite, because he's made himself a very easy target. Even though he is level 6, I should still be able to kill him. Shyvana is slightly different because she has a relatively quick jungle clear. So for Shyvana, you're going to want to probably do another camp in between doing like a blue to red rotation. And it really, again, really does depend on whether you get a pull and how quick your particular jungle clears are. But as I said before, Shyvana has a relatively quick jungle clear. Now, she can do either the raptors, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to walk over to the wolves. Doing a clear like this does mean that you'll do slightly, you won't have as much time to set up for like the warding. But it does mean that you'll get slightly more experience out of the clear. You can see this, do this, walk away, walk towards our blue buff. We can do our blue buff here. We're taking pretty low. As you can see, we'll be able to smite our HP back. The River Scuttler is about to spawn, but we have hit level 3 just off the back of this. And we should be able to set up and walk straight into the River Scuttler spawn, which has just now spawned. So someone like Shyvana, who has got a quicker jungle clear speed, should be able to do a red to blue, but this time round do it in a way that is slightly quicker. And again, you get that choice of Smite. I haven't talked about that yet, but the choice of Smite, I usually always take Chilling. It's better. And as for a Shyvana player, you hit level 4 off the back of this rather than level 3. And for Shyvana, you're probably going to want to come and clear another jungle camp, because you can do this. And once you clear this jungle camp, you should be relatively close to level 5. And you can actually just back at this point, pick up your first item, come back into the red side jungle, and get level 5. I will just show you that. Let's just say I pick up Phage. It's always nice to have boots early on as a jungler, because it increases your movement speed across the map. I like to proc boots coming straight out of the gates. So you can see I've done a red into full blue side clear with the Scuttle pickup. We still have our Raptors if they're available. Some junglers might take them away. You can smite it down. And then suddenly, you know, 2 minutes 40 into the game. Obviously, I haven't been super optimal here. We're level 5. And we can walk straight mid and look for an opportunity to kill. Oh, I don't know where I threw that. Don't know where I threw my very important E. But yeah, we can basically walk straight into the enemy mid lane, look for an opportunity to get a kill. Clearly, I didn't there because I missed my E by a country mile. But nonetheless, a good example of a Shyvana jungle clear. Okay, so those were some examples of a buff to buff. So let's, you know, again, to recap, it's red buff into blue buff into topside scuttle. There are many variations that you can do of that, including if you are really quick jungle clear, you can go red buff into raptors, into wolves, into blue, into scuttle, but you probably would have lost scuttle by this point. But that's what we call a full jungle clear. But the essence is the same. The idea is that you go from red buff to blue buff into river scuttle as your priority. And especially if you're a jungler that doesn't want to fight, like Shyvana, you want to stay away from the enemy, so you're aiming to go for the scuttle that the enemy is not going to be, you know, appearing at. And a lot of that comes down to knowing where the enemy starts. Another form of jungle clear is often when you're staying on the same side of the jungle. And you know when I talked about right at the start, the enemy going from like red to blue, you know, the jungle path that we have just shown is a very common jungle path. Like the red into blue into scuttle is like the most common jungle path in the world. Well, let's say that you want to counter that. Let's say that you're Lee Sin and you want to fight an enemy jungler at the scuttle. So what you can do is you can go red buff into Krugs, into Raptors, into jungle, or into mid lane gank, depending on what you want to do. You have options, right? The other way around could be do it is red into Raptors, into Krugs, into scuttle or bot lane. This is what we call red side jungling. This is where we box the jungle off. You're not bothered about this part of the jungle because your goal is to do your red side jungle and then immediately turn up to the river scuttler to fight it or just take it for free. So that's what we call a red side jungle clear. So I'm going to show you an example of that now in the practice tool. So I might make the decision between Krugs and Raptors depending on whether I think my mid lane or my bot lane is going to be a more viable gank location in the early game. That will come with experience of knowing matchups. But let's say, you know, for this particular example, I clearly have a Malphite that's by himself in the mid lane. So we're going to assume that the mid lane will be a good gank opportunity for me. So we're going to do our red buff, and we're going to go straight from here into the Krugs. Again, you can use 2 smites before the River Scuttler spawns, and you shouldn't have any problems. I like to go Safeguard with Krugs second because they deal a lot of damage. You may want to make sure that when you're a melee jungler, you are grouping the jungle camps up as much as possible, because you obviously have the ability to deal splash damage to them like this. So you can see I'm grouping these guys up. There we go. Just kill them off. Shouldn't have any problems. We're going to move up to these guys here. We're now level 3. And again, we're just trying to group these guys up as much as possible. We can smite. Oh, I flashed. Did not mean to flash. Like this. And then we can do this to have a look at where the enemy jungler is. Let's say we want to go for the Scuttler. We're going to go for the Scuttler here. Now, I'll either be fighting the enemy jungler here or not, but obviously we have that smite available. You can use 2 smites before you get to the Scuttle. And then we've seen an opportunity to gank mid. Malphite bot has overextended, bless his heart. And we get the kill. Now, of course, if we wind that back a little bit, Malphite bot was massively overextended anyway, so we could have come from here into mid and immediately ganked mid if it was the opportunity that arose, okay? So it really depends on the situation, but that is an example of a red side jungle clear setting you up to go for the same side River Scuttler. So I'll do one more example. What happens if you want to start on blue side? Because I know we talked a lot about starting red side, but what happens if you want to start on blue side? Again, there are a few reasons that you might start on blue side, but the main one is that you're a very mana-intensive jungler. A very common example in the lower elos is Amumu. Amumu is a jungler that likes to start on blue because he needs the blue buff for sustain. He's a very mana-hungry jungle clearer. What options do we have as Amumu if we want to start a blue buff? Well, we can start a blue buff, go down to wolves, go across to our red, and then try and go for this River Scuttler. This is what I would call an aggressive Amumu path. Not everybody would expect an Amumu to do this, but it's basically the opposite of going red to blue to this Scuttler here. So we could do that. We could also do a red into Gromp, into wolves, into top Scuttle. This is a opposite of a red side compartmentalized jungle. This is a blue side compartmentalized jungle. This is a good way of avoiding a jungler that may want to kill you as an Amumu. So let's say the enemy jungler starts red. They may go the traditional path into bot scuttle. Let's say that you don't want to fight at bot scuttle because that's where you think the enemy is going. You can do this and just do a blue side clear. The only thing that becomes vulnerable then is your red side jungle. So having some wards from your bot lane or from your mid lane to sort of see if the enemy goes into your jungle means that once you've done this top scuttler, you could potentially go and take either the Krugs or the Raptors from the enemy jungle if they're trying to do the same to you. And again, that is what I would call a very defensive jungle path. Blue into Gromp, into wolves, into top scuttle. You can, as I said before, go blue into wolves, into red buff, into bottom side scuttle, but that might leave you open to an enemy attacking you through a standard jungle path. 2 options that you have realistically. I will show you, because I've shown you the buff to buff, I will show you the Amumu, what I like to call as the Amumu defensive jungle clear, which is this here. So we'll do that one and we'll show you how that works in real time. I'm not going to show you every jungle path in existence. It's just not possible. There are too many and a lot of it comes with experience. I'm just teaching you to think like a jungler in this jungle pathing exercise. Okay, so sorry, a little bit slow here. We're going to show you the Amumu kind of like safe clear. I have been testing out. There is a way to effectively tank blue and Gromp at the same time, by the way. I have tried it out, but you take a lot of damage and you probably need some help in the early game to do it. But there is a way to effectively tank blue and Gromp at the same time as an AoE jungler. But this is what we call the Amumu safe clear. So we just take the blue buff because we're very mana dependent in the jungle. You can see that I'm slowly dragging out I'm slowly dragging out these things. I'm going to smite these two because Amumu is a much better AoE jungler than he is a single target jungler. So essentially smiting the single target camps is going to be better for him in the long run, because when you actually come to do the AoE camps, it's much easier. You deal a lot. You deal a lot more damage, and also take a lot less damage as well. You can see. I'm just going to do this. Get a bit of damage off. We can walk away as Amumu. Basically permanently have that turned on. Now we have options. Obviously, we're a little bit low. We could either go mid lane, but also, as you can see, the River Scuttler has just spawned. We can jump in and we can kill it. This is what we call a safe side blue clear for Amumu. You basically clear your entire blue side jungle. You get yourself as higher level as possible, and you come and take away the River Scuttler where you can. And then, again, as I said, you have opportunities, but let's just say you have a mid lane like this. Because Amumu is a pretty good ganking jungler, we can literally just walk into the mid lane and try and kill Malphite. Don't think I'll have the damage to do it, but nonetheless. Oh, we do. There we go. And you can get level 5 pretty quickly off that. And that's a relatively simple early jungle path for something like an Amumu who wants to be a little bit more safe and avoid conflict in the early game. You can then choose to go over to your red side and continue with your jungle clear, especially even if you don't get the gank. That's obviously something that you can do as well if the enemy jungle hasn't come into your jungle and stolen it away. If you know that the enemy jungle has come in and stolen it away because you've got wards like here, then you can go over to the enemy red side and see if you can get their Krugs, or you get their Raptors. I would say that Krugs is one of the most undertaken camps in the game. Like, no one really takes it. So if you're looking to invade on the top side of the map, Krugs is always a good invade opportunity, because not many people actually take Krugs. And so if you think that you've been invaded and you want to trade, trading for Krugs is always a good thing to do. All right, so a little roundup of the pathing discussion. Got to think of several things when you're thinking about your pathing. And the examples that I've shown you are just a few examples. Obviously, there are plenty more ways to approach the jungle kind of clear. But the first one is jungle matchup. If you're going into a matchup where you lose that 1v1, or if you get into a fight early on, you're not going to be in a good spot, try to go for a jungle path that's going to avoid fighting. For instance, avoid meeting the enemy jungler at the River Scuttler, for instance. Or maybe avoid the River Scuttlers in total and just look for a full clear, trying to retain and absorb as many of your jungle camps as possible. Lane matchup. Who has priority? With that, you've got to look at your lanes. Look at where the minions are in your lane. Look at where your mid laner is in position to the enemy mid laner. Look at whether your top laner is in position to the enemy top laner. Your bot lane the same. If your bot lane and your lanes are in general closer to the enemy turret than you are to your own turrets, then you're in a good spot. Like that means you've got priority. That means you can get into the river and expect your team to help you. I know that I say expect. Not everybody does. Not everybody has the map awareness to be able to do that. But as you get higher and higher in elo, you'll find that your laners are more tuned into the map. And going for an aggressive play, like fighting at the River Scuttler or trying to invade the enemy jungle, that will go wrong if you don't have priority in your lanes. So just make sure you're playing according to your lanes as well. When do you power spike as a jungler? For instance, like Shyvana, she's bad until level 5. So you don't want to fight until level 5. So you want to try and take a jungle path that's going to essentially get you level 5 as quickly as possible. Evelynn, again, not massively strong until level 5. Lee Sin, however, he spikes at level 3. Every single one of his abilities makes him much, much more powerful when fully activated. So level 3, Lee Sin's got a really good matchup. So maybe he wants to go aggressive and look for River Scuttlers as much as possible. Try and track where the enemy jungler is. You've got to think about it. You've got to think as if you were the enemy jungler. You look at what the enemy jungler is playing. Oh, when I played Xin Zhao, I started red buff, and then I wanted to go for a very early fight because I know that Xin Zhao is really good at level 3. So maybe Xin Zhao is going to do a full red side clear and try and match me at my blue scuttle. So I'm going to try and duke him and go into the red scuttle. You've just got to think about what the enemy jungler might be doing, and then think, if you were the enemy jungler, what would you do? And play accordingly. If you want to avoid the enemy jungle, then do so. If you want to fight the enemy jungle, then do so. And finally, you need to figure out whether your jungle style is gank heavy or farm heavy, and that really depends on the types of champions that you like to play. Most junglers have an identity. Lee Sin is a very heavy ganking, heavy fighting jungler. Shyvana and Amumu are quite heavy farming junglers and look to come alive more around the neutral objectives. So just think about what the identity of your jungler is and try and play accordingly to that. Speaking of ganking, let's talk a little bit about kind of how to think about ganking, and then we're going to go through a game and look at like the first 8 minutes of a jungle game that I had in sort of high diamond and low master. Not me playing, but one of the junglers on my team. So let's think about what you can do. A lot of new junglers will take the very obvious routes into lane. The obvious routes for any jungler to look for a gank is through the river. So a lot of new junglers often get kind of obsessed with coming in through these pathways on the river. But there are more unique ways that you can look for ganks, especially if you have a champion that has an ability that can jump over a wall, like Lee Sin, for instance. So let's say you're a Lee Sin, you may be setting up for a gank here. You know, you might be able to jump over the wall and just get into the fight that way. Another way would be to take the long way round and come in behind the enemy from their own jungle, which is something that can surprise them. The same can be said when you're looking to gank in this side of the map. A lot of junglers will come through the river, but you could also come through the long way like this and join the fight and surprise the river like that. Another good way to look for a gank is to come up through the enemy jungle, use the blast cone to get into this brush, and then look to gank. Some junglers will also come round the turret if they're really, really desperate to look for a long lane gank. Another unique way of ganking that is very successful in the bot side of the map or the top side of the map is coming in through the lane and getting into one of these two brushes and then looking to gank from the brush. On the top side of the map, you can walk all the way through the tri-brush and take the long way round into the lane. You could also come through the jungle into the enemy jungle and take the long way round through the lane just to avoid any vision in this area here. You could take the blast cone over the wall and into the lane, or you could do a lane gank through any of these brushes and then try and gank that way. There are plenty of creative ways to look for ganks, and you don't have to just use the river entrances to get in for a gank. There are also lots of conditions that you need to be thinking about when dealing with a gank situation. Let's just take an example. Let's say there's some minions here. First of all, where is the enemy in relation to my lane? So I'm going to use red just to highlight an enemy, right? Let's say the enemy is pushed up here. Then this is a good opportunity to come in for a gank because, you know, the enemy is pushed up and it's going to be an easy opportunity for you to utilize the space behind the enemy before they're able to get to safety. But if the enemy is at their own tower, you're not going to be able to get a gank very easily, so you should probably look to avoid that lane. It's also worth noting how many minions are in the lane. If the enemy has a big stacked minion wave, if you come in and gank, the minions are going to do a crap ton of damage to you as well, and you do have to be aware of that. Minions can hurt quite a lot. Something else that's especially useful to be aware of as well is something like, does the enemy have any gap closing abilities? For instance, Zed, Katarina, Fizz, they all have an ability that allows them to close or disengage a distance. So let's say you're ganking a Fizz in the mid lane. When he uses his Playful Trickster, which is his little bounce on his pole, he's not going to have that up for a number of seconds. So that's going to allow you an opportunity to look for a gank. So just be aware of any cooldowns the enemy might have, including flash. You know, and then if you burn a flash, you're going to have a window to look for another gank. But also, each individual champion will either be high mobility or low mobility. So you've got to be aware of that. Another thing to look out for when looking for a gank is, does your laner have any crowd control to set you up for it? This often happens in top lane, for instance. Like Singed, he can flip them backwards. Malphite, when he has his ultimate, can just go in and look for the engage. Darius can pull them towards him. So think about, if your laner has a lot of CC to help you out. This is especially important in bot lane as well. Like an Alistar can just go in, or a Leona can go in, and that can help set you up for the gank. So just some conditions to think about. Where is the enemy in the lane? Are they pushed up or near their turret? How many minions are there? Can I cope with the amount of minions that are in the lane? Has the enemy used any of their gap closing abilities? Do they have an easy escape? Have they got flush up? And does my laner have any crowd control to help me? Let's jump into an early game. We're going to go through the first 8 minutes and analyze the jungle and help you get more of an idea about how a high level jungler approaches the game. So this is kind of like high diamond, low master tier. I was playing support Lux, which I'm sure I can do another video on for you if you like. But we're going to focus on the jungler, Lee Sin, this time round. This may not be a perfect game, but we are going to talk a little bit about kind of like what happens. I'm going to be illustrating, and I'm going to be using the stop feature to ensure that I'm kind of giving you the best indication possible of what's going on. So as you can see here, Lee is starting red. He had to have a little help from us because he decided to chase Ziggs a little bit, but he's going to be starting on the red buff, as you can see. I'm going to try and keep the focus on Lee Sin's panel here, as you can see as well. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and keep the eyes on Lee Sin. So he starts at the red buff. He goes immediately to the Raptor camp, which is one of the ways that you can look for a jungle clear here. Now, he has to be a little careful because it looks like Ziggs had an idea that this was going on. Luckily, Ziggs, I don't think, got much out of that push, but Lee Sin does hit level 2 here. Now, he immediately uses the Scryer's Bloom to have a look at what's going on around the blue buff. The enemy jungler is an Evelyn, by the way, so you have to be a little careful. But let's stop. Let's pause right here. Let's pause right here. Look at this lane, right? This lane is here. This is where the Katarina minions are coming into here. The Ziggs minions are coming into here. So this is where the lane is, all right? This is what we call a priority lane for Katarina, at least for the time being. Katarina has moved through the jungle, and they can actually see that the blue buff has been started up. What has that told me about what Evelyn's done? Well, it's told me that Evelyn has gone, if you look at the minimap, Evelyn has gone essentially red buff to blue buff. But Katarina, at this stage, is now coming to help Lee Sin because they have priority. Now, Ziggs knows something's going on here, and actually you can see that Lee Sin has decided to go aggressive into the jungle. Let's pause again. Have a look at the bot lane. If you're now Lee Sin, have a look at the bot lane, okay? Where are the enemy bot lane? We don't know. Big question mark. Evelyn knows you're there, and Ziggs knows you're there. So if you're sensible at this stage, you will run away. You don't know where the enemy bot lane is. You used the prio mid to be a bit aggressive. It didn't work out, though. And this is the point where you kind of have to give up and sort of back off. However, what it has allowed this Lee Sin to do, if I just pause and drop the screen a little bit, what it has allowed this Lee Sin to do is we now have river control because bot lane gave up prio. Ziggs has been under his own tower. So we now have river control for Lee Sin to go for the river scuttler, which is just about to spawn. You can see that the red buff, also the blue buff, is still there on the top side of your screen. Evelyn has been scared away. And Lee Sin has allowed himself to use that pressure to pick up this river scuttler for free. So he's picked up the first river scuttler for free. Now, again, Katarina walks out of lane. There is no vision up here for Lee Sin. He has to be super careful because he's got no vision of where the Evelyn could be. But Katarina walks out of lane. He puts a nice little ward over the wall. Now, where could Evelyn be? Let's have a think about where Evelyn could be. Where could Evelyn be? We have a ward over here, but we don't know. We don't exactly know where Evelyn is. The very good or the very likely scenario is that Evelyn backed off, took this river scuttler, and has now gone for Lee Sin's blue. The positioning of Ziggs would suggest that he is covering for a blue buff over on this side. So let's just see what happens. Lee Sin looks pretty confident. Oh, we actually end up getting a kill onto the Draven here. That's nice. Lee Sin looks pretty confident to go for this blue buff. And remember, he was able to invade because he used priority from the mid lane. He now hits level 4. And pause. Okay, so now as Lee Sin, what have you got options? You've got options to go here. You've got options to go here. Or you can go towards your Krugs. What would you do? Yes, you go towards the mid lane. Clearly, it's the best option for you right now. If you have a look over at Katarina, she's at her own she's at her own turret. Ziggs has got no mana, and he's now an open target for Lee Sin. If you look towards the bot lane, there's no one there. There's nothing to do. You really can't do anything. So as a Lee Sin, you are definitely going to go towards the mid lane. Now, Ziggs does watch this play out, but you can see that Katarina has warded that blue buff, and we were correct. We were correct. Evelyn took away the blue buff, and she got the top scuttler. So Evelyn, if we were to look at this from Evelyn's perspective, she got invaded the blue. She did not have priority mid, and her bot lane were not responding super quickly. So she immediately backed off and took the other scuttler to avoid the fight. Evelyn loses that fight to Lee Sin 1v1, so she walks and takes the scuttler and sees that he's still on the blue and takes the Lee Sin blue away. Realistically, Evelyn lost nothing from that invade. Lee Sin looked for a gank in that situation, but alas, it did not play out. And so this is the sensible thing to do. Now, actually, if I pause here, Evelyn has appeared. I'm going to watch this from Evelyn's perspective. Evelyn clearly came from the Gromp round and into lane because she saw that Garen had like 2 HP. And Akali doesn't even need to get near this fight. Like, Evelynn can literally just walk in and kill him here. Doesn't even need to. Akali ends up getting the kill. So Evelynn is level 5 before Lee Sin. Even though she got invaded, she reacted incredibly well to what happened early on in the game. Now, Lee Sin will hit level 5 here, of course, as well. But that was a really good start. And both junglers did well in this early game. Lee Sin used his priority well, and then Evelynn reacted really nicely too. So Lee Sin's going to back off here. He buys the serrated dirk and just gets a little bit more damage. This is now the kind of thing that I wanted to talk about. Something that I haven't really touched on is these big things here. Neutral objectives. Junglers are the drivers for neutral objectives. Now I'm going to switch over to Evelynn for this perspective, okay? She's got about 45 seconds until the first dragon spawn. First dragon spawns at 4 minutes, if you're aware. And you wanted to know. Evelynn is a much quicker jungle clearer the more levels that she gets than Lee Sin. So she's going to take this red buff. And now, if I were her, my direct plan would be to either go or back and come straight down towards this dragon. She's going to buy. She picks up a needlessly large rod. If we were to look at her, she's got 2 needlessly large rods. So she's gone all-out damage here. Just looking for a Rabadon's Death Cap first item. She's got 2 rods available. Now, Lee Sin has just shown himself in this river area with the River Scuttler spawning relatively soon. But Evelynn is super strong and feels pretty confident. You can see on the bottom side of the map, there's a bit of an engage going on. She's now going to wait for Lee Sin and immediately force him back. But, okay. Let's look over at what she can see right now. Lee Sin is low. Me and my AD carry are low. Joey is low. And so for Evelynn, what's your priority here? Have a look at mid lane. We can see Katarina is backing. We can see Akali is walking down. So Evelynn, probably pretty comfortable to just start at this dragon. Like, if I was Evelynn, we just go in, we ward, and we just look for this dragon. Because we know that we have the advantage in numbers, and we also know that some key members of the enemy team have had to back away or are low HP. So this is where Smite fights come in. You can see that Lee Sin is looking for the opportunities. He comes in a little bit too early, kicks away, but Evelynn can use her ultimate to execute it. Doesn't even need to at the end of the day. Now, it wasn't a great fight for them, but they did actually secure the the dragon, which obviously is a relatively big win for that team overall. All right, so I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to stop the recording there, because that kind of tells you everything that you need to know in terms of setting up around neutral objectives and a lot of things, because obviously neutral objectives are really key too. I might be able to actually, do you know what, I'm going to skip it forward. I'm going to go a little bit further forward. We're going to jump a little bit further forward. We're going to follow Lee here. We are now looking at the spawn of the Rift Herald. So I want to see how he sets up for the Rift Herald. Okay, so let's drop it back down to 1. Right, so Lee Sin has come into the enemy jungle. He can see that Ziggs is heading down. The Evelynn has shown herself in the bot lane with 23 seconds to go. So Lee Sin's just taking away some camps. We do trade 1-for-1. Overall, I end up backing off, but the Draven gets a double kill. Now, he's kind of waiting around. He's waiting around for the Akali. Akali doesn't have a ward in this brush. I think Lee Sin's just looking for the opportunity to go for the engage, despite the fact that Garen is permanently pinging back. Now, he's gone for the creative route into the top lane like this. And Akali here is, unfortunately, just dead. Now, what does Lee Sin do with this particular gank? He looked to get a topside numbers advantage and now can go straight through to the Rift Herald. He's going to take the River Scuttler just to secure a bit of solid vision and movement speed around this objective. But they do have a numbers advantage on this side of the map. And he's also seen the enemy bot lane has shown themselves. So the enemy bot lane has not rotated, which is actually why I rotated back on the Lux. The enemy bot lane has not rotated for this objective. So they can be pretty safe that they're in a 3v3 on the top side of the map. And Lee Sin is able to secure this objective and pick up a relatively crucial tower pushing utility. All right, we are going to stop it there now. We'll move on. And finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about junglers that I think work for new junglers. Like for new junglers, you're going to want to have junglers that are relatively easy to play. So junglers that I think are relatively easy to play are... I'm going to get rid of that color. Let's get rid of that color. Let's go back to white. It's a little easier to see. Amumu. Very easy jungler to play. Very farm heavy. Shyvana, also a very easy jungler to play. I think she's really solid. Wukong, a very easy jungler to play, in my opinion. Doesn't have many high-level mechanics. I would say Xin Zhao is a good jungler for new players to play. Rammus is a good jungler for new players to play. And Jax is a relatively easy jungler for new players to play. I would say for intermediates, we'll go to yellow. Gragas is good as an intermediate. Evelyn is good as an intermediate. Vi is good as an intermediate jungler. Jarvan is good as an intermediate jungler. Pantheon is good as an intermediate jungler. And Mundo is good as an intermediate jungler. Oh, I forgot one in the easy camp. Master Yi is good as an easy jungler. And then obviously, if we're looking at harder junglers, Lee Sin, especially quite a hard jungler to get to grips with. You do need to be very good at the game. Graves, only because he doesn't have much crowd control. It can be difficult to make work. Olaf, I would say, is a relatively hard jungler to play because he's very skill shot intensive and you need to kind of know your limits. And Camille, I would say, is a relatively hard jungler to play. Tryndamere, I know I haven't really touched him, but don't play Tryndamere. So, those are the junglers that I would recommend to get you started, and you can ramp up the intensity as you go. That is everything that I have to offer, though, for this jungle guide. Oh, I'm going to get rid of all of those giant squares. I hope it was useful to you, and I hope you learned a little bit about how to play the jungle. A lot of it comes with experience, and I do hope that you go and try out the jungle if you enjoy it, because it's a very, very good role to climb with in solo queue. Keep grinding, and I'll see you soon.